So I wanted to make a video on what it's like to live as an INTJ personality type with a high IQ, because that average IQ of an INTJ is about 133. That's about where I am at. And maybe you can resonate with me. Maybe you know people who are like that, or maybe this helps you understand certain people in your circle. I think there's about 1 in 50 people who are INTJs, so it's not too many. And of course, we're not all the same as well. Nobody is truly an INTJ. These are just categorizations and simplifications of human beings. So nobody is truly fits into a single category. Real quick, what it means introversion, intuition, thinking, and judgment. So I think one of the most noticeable ways you can figure out if you are an INTJ is if you have an amazing ability to recognize patterns and to see the bigger picture of things. So, for example, one way that my thinking works is that I don't need to do something from finish to end. I can begin something, I can see how it develops, I can see how it progresses, and then I'll just use my mind to finish that progression. So I'll know what the rest of it is going to be. And then I analyze, do I want all of this? Do I want to do the rest of this? Is this worth it? What happens when I have it? How can I integrate it into something else? Or what's the point of me doing that or having that? Is it actually worth the time and effort at the end? I see a lot of bigger things that other people don't notice. And this can lead to you having sort of a jack of all trades way of thinking. So you can know, and it goes both ways. So you can know a lot about a lot of topics, and you can structure and formulate your sentences and views in a way that people are they just have no way of keeping up with you. And what can also happen is you can come across as more intelligent than you actually are. So for example, you will, because of your incredible pattern recognition, you will be able to pick out certain patterns and rhythms. And then you'll, for example, talk about this used to be common in the time of the Romans and the Egyptians and the Greeks and this and that, and then people automatically assume you know everything about that society and you're like super informed about everything. But no, you just see a bigger picture. You just think on grander scales, but that comes at the detriment, not often but sometimes, of more microscopic levels of thinking, or really getting down to the sort of basics or in-depth theoretical of small blocks of thinking. It's sort of like when we think, it's sort of like a tree. You have a lot of branches. You have a beginning, and then you think about a topic, and then you take all the things into consideration, and then you come to a conclusion, and then that conclusion sort of becomes like the container of all the thoughts that you had, and then you're done with that. And then from this conclusion you can build up more thoughts with different conclusions, which then adds to, you see, that's how you get like the tree formation of thinking. And this is extremely helpful in certain situations and can be extremely difficult or counterproductive in others. So for example, if that's you, then you would make a great CEO, because you don't need to understand every single point of work in depth, how the labor works. You just need to have a general overview. You need to be able to make good decisions, take everything into consideration, and have a good overview to the point where you can take everything into consideration, but not lose yourselves in details. This is what you are really good for. Or you're also really good. You could be a really good teacher, because you're able to deconstruct thoughts to its essence, and then start to teach it from the beginning up. This is sort of the main way I find INTJ manifests itself for me personally. Obviously, this coincides with an IQ, with a greater ability to rationalize, think, pick up information. But there is something really different or additional to the INTJ, which is the intuition. So, for example, you can be an introvert, but you don't necessarily have to be an introvert. For me personally, I was extremely extroverted in my childhood, and that's a temperamental thing though. But as I got older, as I started to find myself and figure things out, I became extremely introverted, but not because of a lack of ability to assert myself. It just happens to be the case that when multiple people are speaking, I'm just withdrawn, because I just don't really feel like this conversation is on my level. And this is not from an egoic perspective. This is actually my inability to match with them. So when I would want to say the things that I want to say that are actually interesting to me, people really wouldn't really catch on or see the significance of it. And when they're speaking and sharing their views, I have trouble just staying on that level, because it's like mundane. Because for me, it's like, okay, why are we talking about this? What is the end goal of this? What how is this helping us progress? Or like, I'll give you a stupid example. People are talking about their favorite desserts, and for me it's like, well, this is all sugar, it's all dopamine, it's all the same. Like, it's like almost a pointless conversation. And people, they just want to kind of share their experiences and which desserts they like, and you're just sitting there like, you have all this background information, and you already categorized the conversation in of itself and its value, and if it's worth it, and if it's worth investing time into. And like, you just think completely different, which is why you don't fit in. You won't fit in. You do not work. As soon as there's a group of three or more people, you most likely won't have a conversation that you actually enjoy, and the social situations, they are going to drain you, because you will be suffering the fact that you can't share what you want to share, because what you want to share won't be received or understood. You work better in one-on-one settings, because in that setting you have the highest chance of actually being understood, of actually being able to bounce off ideas, to present your case and analyze the other person's case, and then take both views or both trees into consideration, and then build even a greater tree. Like, this is so, you probably love these conversations because they're so deep, but you won't find them a lot. But a conversation like that is extremely energizing, because you're actually able to display all that you know, while at the same time being understood, which makes you feel really good. This makes any human really good. We're social creatures. Well, at the same time, they can actually learn something, so you feel like it is also productive. It almost like it brings humanity forward. Because, like, I swear, we really think that deep. Does this conversation at the end bring humanity forward? In the like, we often think about the grand scheme of things, and we're never really concerned with what we're doing in hand, but what is the ripple effect or the grand scheme effect of things. But something I was talking about earlier, sometimes it is hard for people to understand you, and it is because of a lack of an ability to comprehend. So you don't share your view. A lot of the times you wanna explain to them, not necessarily why you're right, but you want to explain to them the full extent of the situation. Oftentimes it can be hard for people to understand you, because in order for them to grasp what you're trying to say, or why you say the things you say, how you got to that conclusion, you would have to revert from the whole tree to the bottom, right? You are oftentimes basing your arguments, or what you say, or your opinions, or your views, on results that you've already calculated beforehand, right? Remember the folders I was talking about in the beginning. So you took all things into consideration, you thought them through, you evaluated everything, you recognized the pattern, and then you came to a conclusion. And from that conclusion, and from that other conclusion, you're able to build an even deeper sort of pattern. And then from that, you make your point. But that person doesn't have these conclusions. They are still quote unquote in ignorance, or they don't understand where you're even starting to think from, because you're not starting from the basis, you're already starting from conclusions, right? And so a lot of times when you want to tell somebody why you think that way, they will just say, I think that way because this and this, and because such and such. And you're like, okay, well, so first of all, and then you would have to go on like a 30-minute tangent. And most likely they would agree if they would actually sit there and pay attention, because you are just taking in 100 times more information. It's an over exaggeration, obviously, but you're just taking a lot more information in to make your point and build your point than the average person. So it can sometimes be frustrating, because you just don't have enough time, or it just doesn't fit into the conversation for you to explain everything, and people look at you weird when all of a sudden you're like, okay, let's start at the very basis. What is, and like, what are you trying to be, a teacher? Or like, you want to have deep conversations, really, because anything else doesn't really stimulate you. And that's why with most people, they don't really understand you, and you find them, not them as a person, everybody's interesting, but you can often find average social circles or discussions rather mundane, boring, and meaningless, and without any real goal behind it. And so it's like a waste of time, and this can often happen. One more thing is, and that is sort of the intuitive part, and because this is something that you don't have to be temperamentally introverted. I'm temperamentally very extroverted, but because of my experience, because of my thinking, I've been forced into introversion, because sometimes introversion is nothing else but your inability to connect with people. If more people were like you, naturally you would connect with more people. But, and again, this is not from an arrogant perspective, I'm going to get to that right after. The more depth you have, the more you crave it in others, and the rarer it is for you to actually meet somebody who you truly resonate with. But then when you do resonate with somebody, it's on a much deeper level, and it's much fulfilling, and much more fulfilling conversation, because you actually feel understood. You actually feel like you can bounce off deeper ideas and introspect honestly with a goal in mind, and not blinded by ego and cognitive bias or cognitive dissonance and all of these things. And here's the next part, which I want to get to. You can oftentimes come across as very arrogant and even close-minded or egoic, and this is because you're probably, and maybe you've learned to deal with this or to change the way you speak, but you're probably by nature, by temperament, you want to be very blunt, very direct. Like, for example, let me give you an example. Let's say you're in a social setting and there's a girl and she's attractive, and there's a guy, and the girl asks you to, do you guys think I'm attractive? And the guy says, no, I don't think you're so attractive. But she's a very attractive woman, and you know biology, like, you know, he finds her attractive. And so you're inclined to say, well, I think what he's trying to say is that he actually does find you attractive, but he hopes that you're naive and crave his validation. So he will say he doesn't find you attractive, so that in the hopes that maybe you then start to crave his validation and approval, and so you will go to him and try to prove yourself to him, because he does actually like you and want you to be with him, or to give him some type of attention, or to get some type of attention from him. And then you would want to say that, but then when you say that, he feels like offended, and you know, like, it's that's a stupid example, but I think a very good example in that moment, where it's like you often think like that, and you often see motives, and because of that, because you're so rational, and not necessarily always rational, but because you're very goal oriented, you're very focused on what actually matters, you sometimes tend to forget that people are still very stuck in their own egos and identifications, and their biases, and they don't want to be like exposed, whereas you have no problem being exposed. I was wrong, yeah, okay, I was wrong, because the goal is not me being right, the goal is the truth. We want to get to the truth, we want to get to the goal. If I'm wrong, okay, I'll concede, no worries, let's move forward though, right? I was in Pride. Okay, yeah, I was in Pride. Oh, actually, yeah, you, because if the INTJ was the guy who I just quote unquote exposed, he would just say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I find you really attractive. That's why I said it. Sort of as an example, and because we have such a intuitive and introspective humility and openness and bluntness with ourselves, we often project this onto other people. But often people aren't actually able to have that honesty with themselves, because they're too caught up in their identifications and what they are, and they can't take a step back and see the bigger picture and be like, okay, you know what, ultimately, again, when we go down the tree, this is just a biological programming. I don't actually have to be ashamed of that. This is ingrained in every man, and so that's why would we, you know, I hope you get what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say. And this is why you can come across as very arrogant sometimes, or overly blunt, or attacking, because that guy, the example I just mentioned, that guy might feel very attacked. He feels like, oh, you're trying to one up me now, you're trying to threaten me, you're trying to get the girl now, huh? You're trying to mentally dominate me in front of her. But you're just like, no, I just noticed it. But obviously when you get smarter and you start to figure it out, you wouldn't say that, but you would think it, and you would immediately know, and then maybe you would even watch her fall for it and be like, oh, why don't you find me attractive? I want this validation now. And you're like, yeah, okay, it's cool. But you notice a lot of these things, and this leads me to my next point, is you have an amazing bullshit detector. I don't think there's anybody else who has a better bullshit detector than you, if that's you, because you're so introspective, because by your circumstances, and because of your proclivity to think deep and and deconstruct and see the bigger picture, you probably are very self analytical and you know yourself very well. You know why you do what you do, and you try to get to the bottom of things. And when you try to get to the bottom of things with actually a goal or goal oriented mind, you tend to easily put your biases aside and deconstruct why you think the way you think, and you have no problem being in ignorance. Your worldview has probably changed a lot of times because you have no problem replacing it if you find something better or more truthful, because you care more about the truth rather than some personal bias or temporary discomfort, because this is just how a lot of you are wired. And so because you are so introspective, you know yourself, you know your own bullshit, you know your own lies, you can see your own deception, you can see your own ego. And there's a saying, once you know yourself, you know the world. When you know yourself, you know others. Because, for example, biological programming, we all share the same biological programming. If you know yourself, if you're intuitive with what you feel and what you say and what you actually meant and why you have the certain desires, and you can see it in others. So you will smell the bullshit from 100 meters away. And it's not only that you have a pattern recognition or certain understandings of the intuitive world, that which happens within, which you are easily able to recognize in others, and you're even able to recognize patterns where other people don't even know there are patterns. That's one reason you can smell the bullshit. And another one is because you're actually on top of that intuitive as well. So you are one of the hardest persons to fool. It's actually almost impossible to fool. And if you're being fooled, you look back and you, pardon, you already knew you were being fooled. It's just you didn't want to accept it, or you were shoving it away. But even that, you will then look at it, you will then introspect, and you will learn, and then that won't happen because that's just how you function. So yeah, you're not easily fooled. But you are probably, if you wanted to, you could be pretty good at fooling others. And this is probably something that you would be better at in. But obviously, there's also an opposite side, which is that, you can't even bother to quote unquote manipulate them because you just, again, probably see the emptiness in that, or the vanity. But that's more so of a spiritual thing. But I'm going to get to that at the end. Why your type has a big proclivity for self actualization, realization, or quote unquote spiritual advancements, or being interested in topics such as God and spirituality. Because again, you start to build the tree. What is what we actually want? What's actually the point of life? Where should what should we actually do? But there's some more things. Obviously, I've talked about you don't like group settings. Your best conversations are always one to one. Here's some more nuances. You probably don't really care about clothes that much, or you'll care about an outfit and then you'll just wear the same outfit. You maybe have like 7 black shirts, and you don't dress in colors. All that you have is probably like gray, white, and black, and it's like the same outfit, just a little bit different. And maybe you just stop caring, and then a year later you're like, oh, maybe I should buy some different pants. I don't actually really like these pants. Like, you don't care about a lot of mundane things, or like watches. Like, this is like the social status attributed to a watch seems like so stupid to you because you've already thought it through. Okay, you have marketing which plays on people's egos, and this is why they want to get the watch so they can appear a certain way. But actually, if anybody, like, I don't know, you probably don't value these things as much. You probably also have really strong opinions and ideas. Your ideas and opinions are very formulated. You know exactly why you believe the things you believe, and you've thought them deeper than most other people's, which leads you to probably have bigger conceptualizations just in the background of your head of why you think the way you think, and what you believe in. And you're also, because of that and because of your proclivity to get to the bottom of things, you're probably just much more informed than others. You're also tend to not give in to peer pressure as much because you have more to latch onto in terms of information rather than what is being presented to you in the moment. So if you have a lot of ideas and knowledge, people can say all that they want. But if you already know, yeah, I know why you guys are saying that, because you've already recognized bigger patterns. It doesn't matter what the group says. You will stand on what you believe, which is a good thing. It's a quality of a leader. And yeah, let's get into some difficulties that you might have. So one big difficulty that a lot of you will have is social anxiety, especially when you're younger. This will start to get better as you start to figure yourself out and figure out people and realize people are not the way you are. Because here's the thing, you are very observative, you recognize a lot, you see a lot of patterns, you see a lot of things that are embarrassing in other people, because you judge, but not in a judgmental way. You just judge, you just observe, you take a lot of information and you realize a lot of things that other people don't even notice. And because you take in so much information, you can see everybody's desires and motives, and sort of, you almost often cringe at them or feel embarrassed for them, because you can see the underlying reasons or insecurities, or you start to apply this type of thinking to other people, and you start to obsess or overthink about your own self. How am I being perceived? How they look at me? When in actuality, people don't even think half as far as you do. They don't even recognize half the stuff that you're overthinking about. But it takes a while to figure that out, and to realize people don't realize the things you're realizing. Even in social settings, you pick up on so many more things, even subtle ways people try to, I don't know, dominate others, or people try to passively attack, or it's just you just notice everything, because you're intuitive and you have a pattern recognition, and not just the pattern recognition of the external logical, but of the internal. And so you combine that with your proclivity to be much more isolated because of a social disconnect. You get even more informed about the internal world, and recognize even more patterns about the internal world, which you can then see in others. Again, this goes hand in hand with the bullshit detector I talked about. Know your own bullshit, and you won't fall for his bullshit. But yes, this is one of the dangers. You could very easily fall into overthinking, even psychotic states where you question everything, and social anxiety. And you could also, there's two types of INTJs. There are those that really excel in school, and those that just can't get along with school at all. I personally was one of those. I couldn't get along with school at all. Not because I was lacking the ability. I had the ability to have good or perfect grades. But I always was like, I have to understand everything. So I can't just do something because you're telling me to do. I gotta, like, why do I do it? Oh, because you say I need this skill, but then why would I need this skill? And you start to think ahead, and you start to think like, oh, but if I'm finished, why do I have to stay seated? Why can't I go home if I'm already finished? Can you tell me why? No, I can't tell you why. We have to sit here until it's 4 o'clock. And then you can have a lot of difficulties, not with the subject matter at hand, but the way it's being taught, because you just function differently than other people. Other people don't need that many instructions. Other people don't need to understand everything at its depth, and why they're doing it, and what it's exactly for. And you do, because you think ahead. You see, again, you have the trees that goes up. Well, why am I doing this? What result does this bring? If I have that result, what is going to be next? And you just, like, more and more and more and more. But if they can't even tell you why you got to stay seated until 4, even though you're already finished, your brain starts to, like, malfunction. But why? It doesn't make any sense. Tell me why. And then maybe you start to figure out, this is where intuition comes in. They actually don't know themselves. You won't think this, but you'll start to realize that they actually don't know themselves. And then you start to question the whole school system. And you're probably really good at formulating that too, because you have a higher IQ. And then you start to battle with the teachers, and they start to hate you. And you start to sort of expose the school system and their ignorance and inability to formulate why you got to stay seated. Because obviously the teacher, it's just an example, but obviously the teacher is not going to tell you, well, you have to stay seated so that you're going to learn the qualities you need to have in order to function in the work job, or in the workforce. So even though you're finished, you should fit in. You should be part of the group. You should be a unity. You're not special. You're not an individual. And this is why I won't give you benefit for being better than others. You're like everybody else. You're all the same. And this is sort of brainwashing to make you docile, take away your ambition, and make you like everybody else. That's not 100% perfectly articulated why that is the case, but that plays a part. There's a malevolent aspect to this which teachers aren't even aware of, probably. But obviously the teacher won't formulate that to you. But when you're sitting there and you're thinking, and you have a strong mind and a lot of thoughts, you're gonna figure these things out, and then you're gonna formulate them, and the teacher won't know what to answer. The kids are gonna pick up on that because they're intuitive when they're young. Then they're gonna laugh, and you're gonna battle the teacher in the school system, because you start to think about the system in of itself rather than what they're teaching you. And that's why you then have trouble learning what they want to teach you, because you have a problem with the system in of itself and how it's teaching you, because you're thinking way further, right? So that could be a problem. Or you somehow in your mind manage to figure out or come to the realization that this is actually good what you're learning, and this is useful, and this is going to be used in the job that you have, and so you just excel at everything. You just put in the work and you just write good grades everywhere. I wasn't like that though. Yeah, one more thing. People can this is yeah, people can often think you're very arrogant or very prideful, and this could be the case. This could very well be the case, because if you start to think or even recognize, as humbly as I possibly could put this, if you start to recognize that you know more than others, and that you're more informed than others, and that you've gone through a lot of veils of ignorance that a lot of people are still under, you could get into thinking, you could get into like having god complexes, or thinking you're much smarter than other people, and that you're much smarter than you actually are. But even there, if you keep the humility and the introspection, you will jump from thinking you're super smart to, oh, I know nothing, and you will constantly take that away again, because you realize it's like it prevents you from actually continuously learning, and you need to keep that open-mindedness. And it's a trap though. Generally with IQ, there's a temptation. If you have an intellect, there's a temptation to attach yourself to it, and think you're better than others because of that. But if you progress a little bit spiritually, which again I'm going to get to that, then you'll probably notice that this is counterproductive and very unwise to do. Yeah, because you're isolated, this is good and bad. So isolation can feel very difficult, very bad. You might miss out on a lot of social experiences when you're young, but you make up for it with your pattern recognition. You recognize where these social settings would lead you to, you recognize what is the outcome, you recognize what people are doing, and then you recognize pretty fast that, for example, drinking with people who aren't actually your friends isn't really that beneficial or fun, because you see through it, so you don't need to do it 700 times or for 10 years to recognize that. Or another example would be the illusionary nature of chasing another woman to sleep with. You don't need to do it as much as somebody else in order to grasp its illusionary nature, or that it's like empty and you're never finished and you gotta repeat it forever, because again you're thinking ahead. What happens when I do that? What's the conclusion? Okay, then from the conclusion we build up, while other people are just like, oh, desire, let me go get it, desire, let me go get it. Then they're 40, they've wasted their youth, they can't get attached to anybody anymore, and they have a midlife crisis, right? You don't need to go through all the experiences in order to take the conclusions away, because you have a pattern recognition. You can often spot the conclusions without even having to do it, and you're probably always spot on. But that can be a negative thing. The isolation, it can also make you a little bit socially awkward, because you lack practice, because at some point practice is indeed required, as much as you would like to think theoretically you already understand it. You probably do, but there's always a difference in practice. But there's also a positive side to that, actually, which is you start to depend less on external validation. You find yourself, you build habits, and have hopefully healthy habits alone. But again, this could also tip over into drug use. A lot of people who are inclined like that fall into the trap of drugs to cope, because it's a difficult thing, right? You have a lot of gifts, but all these gifts come at a detriment. It always balances out. Yeah, you can be very stressed, you can be overthinking, overcome with thoughts and realizations, and it's too hard for you to categorize everything, and it can sometimes be too difficult to implement everything into your worldview, and you probably suffer a lot because you're trying to find truth or trying to get to the bottom of things and deconstruct everything, and this can leave you restless, anxious, and overthinking a lot of the times. And yeah, there are people who respond really negative to your type, because you're so honest and blunt and direct, and you like that. And some people, they do not handle that at all, because they're too stuck. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say to that. And also, real quick, if you find this interesting and you're thinking like, oh, I want to subscribe to this guy, he's pretty interesting, my channel is about God, just so you know, because I won't upload much videos like these anymore. But here's where I actually want to get to, why your type has a proclivity to spiritual advancement. And again, you probably already know, Why? Because again, you have social isolation, you have a big ability to intuitively recognize patterns, and this is so useful when it comes to spiritual advancements. Because again, once we unravel the trees and all the little things and we get to the bottom of things, why are we actually here? This is the question you're probably concerned with a lot of the times. Because you went from conclusion to conclusion, and at the end you're going to arrive at the bottom. Why are we here? What's the goal, right? And this is why your ability to recognize patterns is so useful in self-actualization, because you will, for example, be able to realize the emptiness of a lot of activities that people waste tens of years on pretty fast. And then you're like, okay, but if that thing which everybody is chasing is empty, and I can clear as day see it is empty because I have a greater ability to recognize patterns, what's the point then? What's the alternative then? Why are we really here? And this is where you get into the spiritual path. And I think once you get into the spiritual path, this is an entirely different point from INTJ and high intellect. I think that's something totally else. Like how I say, you can have INTJs who are very deep in pride, and they can almost feel like their pride is justified because they have a lot of knowledge. They have more knowledge than others. They see and they can read everybody like it's like this. And so they can be very tempted. But that same proclivity to think they're that much smarter, and that same proclivity to give them ego is also the same proclivity that's going to make them more spiritual, and then recognize that humility is the way and their ego is not justified at all, because it never is. It never is. Like, again, I'm not going to bother explaining that. You either know or you don't. But this is what I really want to get to. This is a curse and a gift. It is a curse in a lot of ways, because you miss out on a lot of quote unquote fun that the world has, and from a lower perspective this can be really difficult and hurtful, and you will suffer a lot for that, but that suffering will lead you to better places. And intuitive pattern recognition, that is something that's going to help you on the journey to God. If you can, for example, recognize the illusionary nature of chasing sexual pleasures, right? Like, for example, how Nikola Tesla recognized that and just fucked off and never bothered about women, because he already had the conclusion. He knew that's an empty conclusion. Even though I might be tempted a little bit, I won't act on it, because it's the conclusion is, I don't care about the conclusion or the result of me indulging in that. It's actually negative. So you can recognize a lot of these things, and this will put you on the journey to truly figure out and find out what it's really about. And this is why people like you are probably more philosophically inclined. They're more inclined to think about deeper things and deeper truths and trying to figure it all out. So, yeah, I would say, as much as it is difficult, especially when you're younger and you don't know yet how to handle your deficiencies and your gifts, later on it should get much better. Because once you start to learn, once you start to understand people a lot more, you start to understand that people just aren't like you, and you start to be your own self and do your own thing. In certain areas you will have advancements on people that are like, you're like tens of years ahead to other people in certain areas of your life. And this can be super beneficial. Like, it is a gift. I truly think it is a gift. You will suffer, I think you will suffer a lot more, because you just question and think so deep and notice all these things. But once you're through with it, you're glad you did it. And typical INTJ, if I asked you before you were born, would you want the life that has a lot of suffering, but that's gonna then lead you to the better place, or would you like to live the good place and be the win in the mundane and meaningless things? Of course you would choose the first one. Of course you would choose to suffer and then get to the better point, because you want the conclusion, right? You want the conclusion. You want to get to the better place. You want the better result. You don't care about the why am I doing it? See, you would choose exactly that. So it's almost like, it's almost funny. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost funny. And yes, if you're interested in spirituality and God and all of these things, then maybe my channel is actually interesting to you. I'm a Christian, although I'm not a religious type. Of course, I need to understand everything I believe in, and this leads me to study and think very deeply about why I follow Christianity. And so maybe I can give you some perspectives or examples that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And yeah, I'm also really into exposing the government. No, I have a pattern recognition. So, for example, I recognize the music industry is of the devil and they're programming you, and the political system is corrupt and just here to play a movie and give you the illusion of choice, and the school system is here to indoctrinate you. And like I realize all these things, and if you realize these things too because you're spiritually inclined and you have a pattern recognition, maybe my channel is going to be interesting to you. But yeah, my channel is really about God, actually. But I thought, because I have made a video before where I talk about what it's like to live with a high IQ. I have an IQ between somewhere 130 and 145, depending on test I take. And the average INTJ is 133. And there aren't that many of us, so... And that video did quite well, but then I deleted it because it's not part of my channel. But I wanted to make this video because maybe some of you are going to find it interesting, or some of you are going to be able to resonate. And yeah, it would be nice to hear your experiences as well. Like, feel free to write in the comments what it's like. You know, maybe you can sort of find one another, or I don't know. But that's what it's like to live as an INTJ. It's very isolating, it's very lonely, but it's extremely fulfilling because you find that which you wouldn't find if you were too busy and distracted by the mundane and meaningless things. And I think ultimately that fulfills you much more, even though you've probably suffered a little more than others. Although we all suffer, we all have our struggles and difficulties, obviously. Again, there's no ego in that statement. It's just I'm inclined to think you probably suffer more. Maybe not in reality, maybe just in imagination, but even if you imagine the suffering, you still feel it, so you still suffer. So, yeah.